we have the pleasure of talking to our Senate Majority Leader, Jack Johnson, about the goings-on of the General Assembly, good, bad, and ugly. Hopefully more good than bad, and hopefully very little ugly. Jack Johnson, how are you?
I'm great, Matt. And by the way, you're wearing a tie. You dressed up.
I dressed up for you.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard or not.
Well, and then there was the whole Men of Valor breakfast, too.
That's neither here nor there. Well, thank you. There's no question in my mind that you turned on your radio, you heard I had a tie on, you immediately turned back around and went back to the house.
I did.
So that you look as good as you do.
To get all spiffied up for you.
Let me tell you something. That somebody is putting together the tie and the shirt in your wardrobe, because
Does it match?
I don't pretend like you have that level of matching ability.
Well, you remember Garanimals. I mean, I have the little animals on each, so I lay it out and make sure I've got the same animal on each piece of clothing.
How are things going in the General Assembly?
They're great. They are. I've been around there for a while, and the process works. It works. Sometimes it looks a little ugly, maybe from the outside, but committees are shutting down, and bills are being bad bills are being dispensed with and not passing out of committee. We've got some really good legislation coming out, making its way to the floor. Getting ready to kind of start budget discussions. That's obviously the most important thing we do, is decide how many of your tax dollars we need and how to spend those. And I think we do a good job of that in Tennessee. So getting ready to start that budget discussion, and obviously got some big pieces of legislation out there too that we're working on and hope to get across the finish line.
I had the good fortune of speaking with Governor Bill Lee earlier in the week.
I heard it, by the way. Yeah.
It was a great conversation. And I made mention to him this, and I am ashamed to tell you that I don't know as much about this as I probably should. I'm talking about the franchise tax. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have a lot of time to talk about it. I want to delve into it a little bit with you. It's consistent with the way that we do things, that this is apparently good news for the taxpayers of the state of Tennessee. So we're not gonna talk about that. We're just gonna talk about all the bad things you guys do. What about this do we need to know about, and what are the consequences? What are the impacts on the citizens of the state?
Sure. So there was a United States Supreme Court decision that came down, I believe, in 2016 relative to the state of Maryland. And it dealt with their franchise tax, and it has to do with how companies are taxed and whether they own property and on their net worth. And it gets very wonky in the weeds. But it's a tax we've had on the books since 1935. Tennessee has had this tax for 90 years. And Maryland had a similar tax, and it was deemed unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court about 7-8 years ago. At that time, obviously, our folks took a hard look at our tax to make sure we were compliant with that decision from the Supreme Court, and made a determination at that time that felt like our tax was okay. Well, we were contacted by some folks representing some companies here, said, we're not so sure about that. So the governor did the right thing. I said, you know what, let's fix this. Let's address it. And basically, it's going to mean a significant tax cut. I'm told the largest tax cut in the history of the state of Tennessee for about 100,000 businesses all across the state. So we're fixing a problem, and we're doing something we really like doing, and that's figuring out a way to give money back to taxpayers.
And I'm a believer, as the free market works, that means that will translate to lower prices on the consumer level.
Absolutely.
That's
and
the
more
idea.
People being hired and businesses expanding. And we're already one of the most competitive states in America to own and operate a business. This is going to make us even more so, and that's a good thing. Now, the downside of it is, because of the way our statute is written, what the Senate has passed as proposed by the governor, is we have a statute of limitations. If there is an issue with your tax, then you can go back 3 years prior. Mm-hmm. And so the governor feels like it's the right thing to do. And I agree that we should set aside some money. And it's a lot of money, but it's going back to taxpayers. And that's okay. About $1.5 billion for companies that have paid this tax. They can go back and potentially apply for a refund for the last 3 years. So it's a big budget number. And, I'm not sure we would have necessarily taken a look at it had we not been contacted, but it's the right thing to do. And again, we always enjoy getting taxpayer dollars back in the hands of taxpayers.
And so there's no anticipation, consistent with this idea that businesses don't really pay taxes, consumers do. Consistent with that idea, there's no anticipation that we're going to have a $20 minimum wage for fast food joints in the state of Tennessee?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. And I'll go a step further. We passed a bill a few years ago because we had a couple of municipalities, and you probably figure out which ones, that wanted to create their own minimum wage or a living wage. And we passed legislation preempting them. And if there's going to be any change in the minimum wage in Tennessee, and it remains at $7.25 an hour, if there is to be any change in that, that's a decision for the General Assembly.
Let's talk about the elephant in the proverbial room. How much more time do we have in the General Assembly, by the way?
We don't have a set date, but we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm going to say another 2 or 3 weeks, probably, for us to wrap up our business.
I mean, obviously, the biggest lift at this point is the school choice legislation, the Freedom Scholarship Fund. Where are we in the Senate on this bill?
So we are in our Finance Committee. The bill passed out of our Education Committee overwhelmingly with overwhelming support. An amendment was as proposed by the governor. It was modified slightly. Our education chairman believes in if you're going to have universal school choice, that should include a mechanism by which people can attend different public schools. And so he wanted that part of the legislation. So with that modification, it passed out and is now in our Senate Finance Committee. It was calendared this week, but we didn't plan to take action on it. The House is in their budget subcommittee, so it's made it out of their respective education committees, subcommittees, and full committee. And so, as has been talked about, the House version of the bill looks different than the Senate version of the bill. That's okay. That happens with a lot of legislation. Mm-hmm. We're a bicameral legislature. We have different thoughts and different ideas. And so parties are talking and discussing some of the things that are in the House bill. There's a couple of things in the Senate bill that they don't have. And so we're working through that. And I'm hopeful that we can end up with something that will come out of our respective finance committees, make it to the floor of both chambers and get passed. There is always the opportunity for a conference committee if we need that. And we go to conference committees on a lot of bills. But I'm hopeful we can get something decided upon.
Help those of us who don't get an opportunity to see what happens in those types of settings understand how that works. If you have different bills, what do you go to the table? I understand there are a lot of different players, so maybe even the players themselves operate a little bit differently. But how would you like to see it work? That you find out what each body needs to have in their legislation first and foremost, and I mean, just walk me through what those compromise discussions are like.
Sure. So, as I said, the Senate version of the bill is a more streamlined version. The House has a lot more elements to it, some of which are good public policy ideas. And so, on the Senate side, I'm the prime Senate sponsor, but our Education Committee Chairman, John Lundberg, Senator Lundberg from Bristol, is the co-prime sponsor, and he's the one actually carrying and presenting the bill. And he knows education forwards and backwards. He's a real expert. You have my good friend Scott Sapicki.
Yeah, he's real smart on it too.
He knows education forwards and backwards, as does Representative Kirk Haston, Mark White. And so those are kind of the education-centric guys that have really been in the trenches. I've never even served on our education committee. So these guys can really do a deep dive into some of these things, obviously having continued conversations with the governor. So, but ultimately we need to bring a mandatory language back to each committee and hopefully be in agreement, something that we can get to the floor. And then in terms of process, as you were asking, if we end up with a different version of the bill in the House and the Senate, we have numerous opportunities to concur, is the term we use, with the other chambers' work and kind of bounce back and forth. And ultimately, because in order for a bill, there are two things that have to happen for a bill to become a law. It has to be filed in the Senate and the House in identical fashion. It has to start identically, and when it passes, it's got to be identical. But all along the way through the Senate process and the House, it can go in any different direction. But at the end of the day, we have to pass an identical bill.
That is the case with this?
Yes, absolutely.
So I have characterized this. Tell me if I'm doing it wrong or right. I've said that it feels like, from what I know about it, and I don't want to talk above the audience, that the Senate bill is strictly an expansion of the education scholarship concept to more potential individuals in the state of Tennessee, to 20,000 individuals. It feels like the House version has that component in it, but it is more of a broad-based education reform bill.
Exactly. And you characterize it perfectly. And you can argue it both ways, and I just want us to pass good legislation, and at the end of the day, that's generally what we end up doing. And but you've got to go through that process. There were some things that were very important to some House members that are not necessarily specifically regarding school choice, but certainly regarding education. And so it's a subject matter bill, and sometimes bills end up doing different things, and that's okay. But you're right, the Senate version is pretty much limited strictly to school choice. The House bill has a number of other things in it.
And I hate it that there are some exterior to this process, and maybe I've been accused of doing this in the past, that want to put bad intentions in the actions of good people. I don't think there are any bad people here. I think that there are just different ways to look at it. But at the end of the day, politics becomes involved when you start counting votes, right?
Yes.
And so I think what you're saying is that what you deal with is the reality of, hey, there are certain pieces maybe in the House that certain members really need to take it back to their constituents and say, here's what we got for this bill, versus I feel like the Senate is more in line with let's do this as a standalone, and then we can address some of these other pieces as standalones as well.
That's exactly right. And I don't take fault with anybody's approach to it, because, again, it's all about education, and we're all very passionate about education in this state, and we've worked hard, and you've given me a great opportunity to talk ad nauseum about some of the myriad of things we've done to improve public education in Tennessee. And at the end of the day, we have 967,000 kids in public schools in Tennessee. And this proposal is for 20,000 scholarships to give parents an option, another opportunity, be it private school, homeschooling, or whatever, that would be a better fit for their kid. But even if the full implementation of this, you're still going to have around 950,000 kids in public schools in Tennessee, and we want them to be good schools.
Well, I mean, not only in your role as Senate Majority Leader, but also as you represent Williamson County. I'm curious how you approach this. If people come up to you in a restaurant on the street and say, Jack, explain this to me. Why? Do you feel like you've moved on the issue at all over the years? And how do you explain it to your constituents who are trying to get their head around? Because I've heard some conservatives who are legitimately concerned that allowing, money to be funneled to the government and then back to the parent via the school in the form of scholarships would somehow give the government an ability to take more regulatory control over private schools.
Sure. And I've heard that argument as well. And I wholeheartedly disagree with it. At the end of the day, no one's been a stronger defender of the independence of the homeschool community, and certainly private schools. That's why they exist. This is not an attempt to inject more governmental control on private schools or the homeschool community. And I've said on a number of occasions that, look what California did. California passed a bill that said if you want to homeschool your kids, you have to have a bachelor's degree. Well, that's going to disqualify a whole lot of people. We could pass a law that says you have to have a PhD in education in order. Well, that would obviously kill the homeschool community, and we don't want to do that. I applaud and I celebrate the homeschool community and the private schools, as do the vast majority of my colleagues up there. This is simply an attempt from the governor and those of us who support his legislation to give more families the opportunity to make that choice, because for some, lack of financial resources are prohibiting them from being able to make the same choice that a number of families do. So I believe in great public schools. We've done more in the last 10 years as a Republican supermajority to advance public education than the Democrats did in the 30 years prior. So no one can legitimately accuse us of being anti-public education. But I do support parental choice. And you said it perfectly, Matt. We're not giving money to private schools or to homeschools communities. We're giving money to parents. It's tax dollars. I was just talking about, we like to figure out ways to get tax dollars back in the hands of Tennesseans. And that's what we're doing. We appropriate $7,000 a year to educate every kid in this state. And right now that goes to a public school. That may not be the best option for you or for your child. So let's give you that scholarship and you go decide. We're not telling you where you got to go, and we're certainly not
You don't have to do anything.
You don't have to do anything. And if you're in a private school now or a homeschool community and you don't want to take the scholarship, don't take it. That's totally fine.
So how confident are you that whatever disagreements or whatever differences that there are between the two versions, that you'll come to a conclusion before the end of the session?
I've said this. I feel so strongly about this. I know the governor does as well. As far as I'm concerned, failure is not an option. We have to get this passed, and I'm willing to work as hard as I can to get it done. And I know that from the governor and the lieutenant governor and the Speaker of the House and the House Majority Leader, the Senate Majority Leader, our respective education committee chairs and subcommittee chairs, we are all very passionate about getting this done this year. That's not a promise. I never promise anything, but I'm very optimistic that we will get a good bill to both the Senate and the House floor, and we're going to start empowering more parents to make good decisions for their kids.
You bring up homeschool. Is that still a difference between the two, the House and the Senate version, and how do you think that gets worked out? I'm hearing from House members that many of their constituents are. There's less of a direct transfer of money with regard to homeschool,
right?
But in the Senate version, homeschool is included.
It is included, and I think, and I would like for it to be included. Again, I celebrate the homeschool community and the independence of that, and I'd like for more parents to be able to choose that option if they think it's the right option for their kids. There have been some concerns and some pushback from some in the homeschool community, and I respect their feelings. The House has taken it out. If that's where we end up, I'm okay. We're still going to help, lots and lots of families with that. I would just like for more families to be able to utilize that option if they think it's best for their child.
Senator Jack Johnson, when we come back, we'll talk chemtrails.
Okay.
We'll talk pornography on the internet, amongst other things before the General Assembly this session. Senate Majority Leader Jack Johnson in studio with us on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Super Talk 99.7 WT and a few more good minutes with Senate Majority Leader Jack Johnson. He's in studio with us this afternoon. Glad to have him with us on the Matt Murphy Show on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. I first learned of this next bill that I want Jack's thoughts on really this morning on Nashville's Morning News, and then I listened to Chris Hand talking about it a little bit, and I thought, well, how fortuitous that I have the Senate Majority Leader coming in studio with me, and we can talk about Senate Bill 1792. Brought by Senator Becky Duncan Massey. It came out of Senate Finance Committee, which would eliminate the final hurdle before being heard on the entire Senate floor. Now, there's, I used the phrase earlier this morning, plenty of slip between the cup and the lip. My grandpa used to say that. That means that, you don't count your chickens before they hatch. But let's talk to the Majority Leader about his thoughts on this legislation, which would make Tennessee the latest state, and there are several others that have done this, to require photo identification verification to access websites that are considered pornographic in nature. Walk me through this, Senator.
Sure. So Senator Massey has been working on this bill for some time, and here's how I rationalize it, because I do support the legislation, and I voted for it in committee and plan to vote for it on the floor. In order to go into a store, I don't even know if they sell them anymore, but to buy Playboy magazine, you have to be of a certain age. If you want to go into some of these stores that sell certain things over here off the interstate that are of an adult nature, you have to be of a certain age to even go into the store. Mm-hmm. And yet we've got our kids walking around with devices in their hands that can access so many bad things, including pornography. And so to me, it makes it consistent that if you are selling that or making that stuff available, that you need to make sure that your customer is age of majority.
So why would that not be a responsibility on the part of the parent? I mean, right now, there are, there's cable programming that comes into individuals' homes, and I understand that they pay for that programming, so it's slightly different. They would pay for the internet too, so I think it's a similar. Sure. So why wouldn't it be ultimately the responsibility of the parent?
Well, it is, and it should be as well. But again, I keep it as consistent with if you're not going to have eyes on your kid all the time. And so society gives you some degree of protection to at least know that if, when you and I were kids, we couldn't go into the 7-Eleven and buy that magazine that was on the back row wrapped in paper. If we did, the store wouldn't sell it to us because it was against the law. Mm-hmm. Society had decided that no, that we are going to restrict the sale of that to minors, to children. And so, to me, Senator Massey's legislation is consistent with that. If you believe that society should provide some degree of protection, even for the best of parents who, and I've got 3 kids, and they had cell phones, and it was something that worried my wife and me all the time. But I will be comforted by the fact, and I think most parents would be, knowing that their child can't access something of that graphic nature because they're a minor.
I think that aspect of all of this is a good and exciting debate about where the role of government ends, Absolutely. Where the role of the parent begins. And you've stated your case very well. What about data collection regarding the age verification? Are there protections within the legislation that would give? I mean, let's be clear. Individuals, adults, for example, that go to these websites are probably a little bit gun shy in the in the idea that some of their information might become public. That might be somewhat of an indication that you're doing something wrong, but whatever. I mean, I'll leave that for a different conversation. But are there protections against data collection?
Sure. So, yes, there are very, very stiff penalties in the legislation and very strict parameters. And I'm sorry, I don't have it right in front of me, but you can find the legislation online. There are very strict parameters relative to what these companies can do, how long they keep this information, and the requirement that they keep it private, much as, you have to give you have to give personal information when you buy an airline ticket. There are other things out there, and the law makes it very, very discouraging for those companies that have that data to make sure it's protected. Same as banking.
I'll surprise you here. What about, and this might seem crazy, what about age verification to access the internet?
Well, it's good. It's a fair question. And where do you draw that line? Because the internet has changed everything. I mean, there's so much good. I mean, how many times have you thought of something in a conversation with, let me just look it up real quick and the things you can accomplish. When I'm sitting out in front of the radio station waiting for you to come down and get me, I can respond to 3 emails and a couple of text messages, and I'm making productive use of time. So there's a lot of good, but there's a lot of bad.
Y'all see what he did there, by the way. You see what the Senate majority did there to you, Bell? Threw you right under the bus.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He didn't get down there very quick. He made me wait. I answered 14 emails and took 4 telephone calls waiting on you, Bell. No, I mean, and I asked the question. It's sort of an extreme example of where this could eventually lead. And some people might not have a problem with that. I sadly would digress to say that, I would have told you that the internet is obviously a net positive for society. And I still think maybe I believe that. But the teeter-totter has certainly shifted quite considerably over the last 10 or 15 years.
Especially when it comes to our kids.
Yeah,
especially when it comes to our kids. And I've heard that argument, and I respect that. Yes, it's your job as a parent to be a parent to your kids. And those of us with kids do the best job we can. But there are also protections. We have laws that you can't sell your kids alcohol or cigarettes.
Yeah, sure.
Or, there are things that we as a society have decided that, no, we're going to prohibit that to try to help parents, as best we can.
Yeah, I mean, it's a basic age of majority, right?
Exactly.
There are certain things that you need to be at a certain maturity level in order to make a responsible, reasonable adult decision for yourself. Exactly. Real quick, 2 points. One, there are some in the state, and I don't like to give them too much credit or weave the conversation in that direction. But there are some that are telling me that the General Assembly is not doing enough about illegal immigration. And I wonder if you feel like that there's more that the state, obviously it resides in Washington at the federal level when it comes to our southern border security and all that. What more can we do if we find that we're being, the zone's being flooded, as so many states are recognizing, with illegal immigrants?
Well, it's a fair, and trust me, it is a big topic of conversation. And probably in this legislative session, we've had more conversations about that very thing. What can we do now that Joe Biden has made every state a border state and every town a border town, with millions of people coming across the southern border, made so terribly frustrating with the knowledge that just a few short years ago, President Trump had effectively secured the border. And any inflow was down to a trickle. So yes, we are talking about it. And some people have brought up some good ideas. We have E-Verify, should probably use it more. We've had some legislation about transporting illegals. And I think if you're doing that knowingly, and it's already against the law, but should we stiffen those penalties? That's been a conversation. What you've heard me use this term, and I'm stealing it from the late great Phil Valentine. What we have to do is demagnetize Tennessee. That we just have to make it the least hospitable place in America. The whole Tyson Foods conversation with the Biden administration contemplating some type of legal status that will allow them to work. And we have those facilities in Tennessee. We had the report of the middle of the night plane flight into Chattanooga back a year or so ago. And threats of additional, mass importation of people. And we don't think that that's happened after the Chattanooga. So no, we take it very seriously. We are somewhat hamstrung by what we can do, because I don't like giving more responsibility to the federal government. But if there are any enumerated powers for the federal government, as we believe in those specific things, certainly protecting our nation from invasion is one of those. And the federal government's failing miserably and putting us in a situation where we have to figure out how do we keep them from coming to Tennessee. So open to any and all ideas.
Have we not, and we're desperately short on time, Belton, I know that, but have we not gotten to the point where we could expect that any business operating in the state should and could have the ability to e-verify that their employees are legal?
Absolutely.
Legal.
And by the way, any business can e-verify now today.
I mean, what is the law? Is it, I think it's 30 or 35?
35 and greater. And we've had conversations, and I support taking that down to if you employ one person. Then you should have to utilize e-verify.
Because we know what is happening. Sadly, I mean, and I'm not trying to call anybody out, but an example is the construction industry. Contractors have subcontractors. Those subcontractors have employee bases that are below the threshold. Right. And so it's a loophole that they find their way around. We know that that's going on. Once again, I'm not besmirching that industry. I use it as an example.
Sure.
So maybe eliminate that loophole.
Well, exactly. And I do support that. And we've had those conversations previously and increasing the enforcement of that and stiffening the penalties for those businesses, even ultimate removal of your business license and ability to do business in the state of Tennessee if you are knowingly hiring someone who's in the country illegally.
All right. Final question. Are you tired of the chemtrail jokes yet or what?
No, it's fine. There's a lot of misinformation out there about the bill.
We banned chemtrails, right?
Yeah, not contrails.
But I saw. Is that what is that?
Well, and you're getting in. It wasn't my bill, and I wasn't on the committee. I did vote for it on the floor. It just simply says you can't inject chemicals into our atmosphere. There are airplanes that fly through the sky that produce, the
condensation.
The long white, and that's fine. We're not doing anything about that.
You probably couldn't do anything about that if you wanted.
Exactly, it's science. I don't understand all of that. But if you're up there dispersing chemicals into the atmosphere for the express intent of trying to change climate activity, then you can no longer do that in the skies above Tennessee, and I think that's a good thing.
Jack, it's always good to have you in.
Thanks,
Come by anytime, and all you have to do, speaking of loopholes, just hit me up. And I'll lash the whip, and he'll get down there. You won't be able to ask us.
It'll be great. Well, I hope you'll have me on sometime during the summer. I'm going to come in shorts and a t-shirt, and hope you'll be dressed accordingly.
I will dress said same. Thank you, Jack.
Thanks, man.
There's Senate Majority Leader Jack Johnson, 136 on Superdog.